Now this is Morley College in about 1924. We're not going back to the old Vic days, we're only going to talk about what happened here. This used to be a school, a boarding school, in fact, for Yorkshire boys. A bit unusual, but that's another story really. And you can see Wellington Mills on the far right there. So that's Morley. I don't know where all the traffic was the day they filmed this. Amazing. So it was quite a rambling old building, but it had bits added to it. This was the magic of it. It had a large playground at the back because it'd been a school. And what was built on the playground was a gymnasium, a hall and a refreshment room. And two of those rooms became very significant. This is the refreshment room before the murals got at it. And we have evidence that the students didn't like this room. It was basement level and it was gloomy. And it was full of drab and meaningless paintings, which the students absolutely hated. This is from Mr. E.R. Saul, who was a regular contributor to the magazine, and he talked about these meaningless drab compositions, once pictures. This sets the tone for a college that had no art in it at all. This is all it had, some drab and meaningless pictures, and it spoilt everyone's digestion. So we'll go back to, this is the refreshment room, and look at the students, how young they are. It's quite a different picture from today, and you can see they've got briefcases under the desk, they've all come from work, they're all keen to study, and remember Morley only operated in the evenings then, not like today where it's open almost 24/7. These are people coming straight from work and getting on with their life. And you'll see a drab and meaningless picture there on the right hand side, no idea what it is, and that stag's head is definitely horrible. This was the hall. Now this hall was actually bigger than Emmons Hall. This could seat 650 people, but as you can see again it's a bit drab. So now we're going to talk about the 1930 murals. This is my specialist subject and I'm always wittering on about it, so you'll have to excuse me. I have got notes, but I'm going to try not to read from any of them. In 1927, a new principal came. Her name was Eva Hubbock. She was very revolutionary. She really jazzed the college up because it was pretty dull. It was a dull old school. There wasn't the money to do it up nicely, but students liked it because they'd come from the old Vic and it was a bit cramped around there. Anyway, a suggestion was made, and this follows on. Kate's going to talk later about Rex Whistler. The Royal College of Art students came and did some decoration, and this was funded by Sir Joseph Duveen, who was a very influential British art dealer, and he put up the money for it. The idea was to decorate the dull refreshment room and the equally dull hall. Originally he put up £500 for this project, but it got increased in the end to £1,300 because they had to paint the room, the rest of the room to go with the murals. Pipes had to be moved. There was quite a lot of toing and froing between the college. We've got the college minute books and they're quite fascinating. It cropped up monotonously. We need to move pipes, we need to do this. So this is one of the pictures we're going to see. So the two people that decorated the refreshment room are now household names, but they weren't then. 1927 this project was suggested. They had just left college, and it was Edward Borden and Eric Revilius, both of whom now have a great following everywhere. But at the time, this was their first really big project. This particular picture shows, this is King Lear, this one. This is part of the Shakespeare Wall. Yes, we'll skip him. This is one everybody knows about, Revilius's boarding house. Sometimes it's called a boarding house, sometimes a lodging house, sometimes a doll's house. We know that his wife, they weren't actually married at the time, had a very good doll's house. And so she was very keen on doll's houses. And in fact, she is in this picture. She's going up the stairs at the top there. You can just see the back of her. That is Tirzah Garwood, who now has become equally as famous as her husband, having just had an exhibition at Dulwich. So this is the boarding house. This picture I dug up at Lambeth Archives. It's in our stuff. And I like this one because it's got chairs in it and it gives you some idea of how far up the wall the murals were, and the fact they had a rail here to stop people banging into them. Now remember, these were painted in situ. They didn't just arrive like the ones in the refectory now. They arrived here on boards. These were actually painted straight onto the walls. So the students could see this happening on a daily basis. The artists were paid £1 a day, which is quite a lot of money at the time. Questions were being asked in college minutes as to why it was taking so long. And I think part of the problem was they were having a good time doing it. Edward Borden, if you know his work, it's very particular, and apparently he was always repainting it. That's why it was taking so long. So here we have the boarding house. This is actually a sketch which is at the Froy Gallery, and it was given to Edward Borden by Eric Revilius. The Froy Gallery had it in their collection for a long time, didn't actually know what it was. We managed to identify it, and there he is up there. There's Harlequin, top left. So it's nice to see it in the right place, and I provided them with a picture so they can identify it now. And here's a colour version of Life in a Boarding House. This is the Graphic, which was a weekly newspaper. They liked it so much they used it twice, once in black and white and then in colour, which I think is quite revolutionary. So here we've got this boarding house. It's quirky, like all this kind of stuff. There are little dogs or cats on the finials of the roof there, which is quite amusing. And now you can see Terza going up the stairs in colour. I've actually blown all the pictures up as well, so you can see them. This chap is a poet, and that's his muse floating down to give him inspiration. And here we have the vicar coming to tea, presumably. A couple of people having a chat. We've got this poor pianist, like me this afternoon, trying to play Mozart. And here we have a real person. We know who this person is. Her name was Beryl Sinclair, and she was a friend of the group. So there she is with her aspidistra and a cat. I think some of these details are a bit like Brick House in Great Bardfield. Now we have a nice story here. I found this in a letter from Revilius in the British Library, and he said, "I have imprisoned a mandrake in the yard under the greenhouse." This is an original sketch which lives in the V&A. This is the actual photograph of the murals as done. And yes, he has trapped a mandrake there. Now the next slide is a bit of a surprise because it's not actually anything to do with this mural. This was made by one of our HND ceramics students recently. I gave them a talk on Morley history, and they were supposed to produce something about Morley history. And she came back about 2 weeks ago and produced this. It's about that high. And she's got 2 mandrakes growing in it. So she was inspired by this idea of the mandrake. And there is actually a gardener. You can't quite see the gardener. He's up here. And there's also a dog. Anyone know the story about mandrakes? It's folklore. A mandrake is a real plant, but apparently if you pull it up by its roots, it shrieks and the noise kills you. So the idea here is the gardener would send his dog in to pull up the mandrake. It would kill the dog, unfortunately. It's a bit of a sad story, but I thought this was so beautiful we had to include it. Here's some quotes. This collaboration between Borden and Revilius really caught people's imagination. We've got press cuttings for this, and there's over 50 newspapers represented, and all the big art journals as well. I think the press went absolutely crazy over this. They didn't do it for the Canterbury Tales at all. We're talking a different era. I mean, it was 30 years later when we got the Canterbury Tales, but every newspaper in the country seemed to have reported this. There's some ideas of what they thought of it. What is nice if you read a lot of them is you get an idea of the colour of it, because we've only got 2 colour pictures to look at, plus the original sketches. Most of the original sketches at the moment are at the Froy Gallery. If you pop up to the Froy Gallery before the end of the month, you can actually see some of these original sketches. Some are quite elaborate and beautifully done, and some really are quite sketchy, but you get an idea of the colour. But I like this bit about the artists been working with their tongue in their cheek, because I think they really had. The principal at the time actually said, this was in the Morley magazine 2 years after it was finished, "The London boarding house is just a joke, as indeed are many of the figures flying about in between." Now we have a bit of Revilius's work. So again, we got Faust over here. Interestingly, this top panel in the tier, he used it somewhere else too. I found it in another book. He used it in a completely different publication. So here we have some of the fantastic figures flying about in the sky. This one is Pomona. Not sure who the other two are. We've got muses in the sky, and the little chap on the top right we're going to come back to in a minute. The Arraignment of Paris is a fairly obscure play. Revilius went for quite obscure plays for this. But you can see how delicate everything is. It's quite unlike anything else he ever did, because he didn't really like painting people, we decided. If you look at his later work, there's rarely any people in it. Now, we have a lot of students who really like these murals, and the one that liked them the most was Philip Lewer. He only wrote for the magazine for about 9 years. He disappeared after World War II. I don't know what happened to him. And he did spoofs, which I think are really funny. And this is a spoof on Samuel Pepys visiting the college. Now, of course, Samuel Pepys couldn't have visited the college because he'd been dead for about 300 years by then. But he wrote this very funny piece, which I'm going to read you. "I then being hungry to the restaurant below ground, which is a mighty odd room, wherein clever artists have made romantic pictures right onto the walls, and weird they are, as the eye ever did see, and I confess I never did perceive their like, not even with merry mind after mighty drinking. 'Tis said indeed that many of the paintings do represent diverse scenes from the plays of one Will Shakespeare, which if it be true do surprise me, for I have never heard of this Mr. Shakespeare before, nor know he made plays. Yet methinks he might be a foreign playmaker from distant parts, where men in garments of green or pink do fly birdily through great clouds, scarce 16 inches above the ground, and carry little forests unto saucy jades, who dress in nothingness with mighty indifferency." So in fact, I think this is Revilius's work, and this is definitely Borden's work. But I'm sure that's what he was referring to, those rather naughty little ladies. We were going to put a warning on this talk because there was nudity in it, but I think we're all adult enough to cope with that. The sketch for that is also at the Froy Gallery. It's quite large too, it's surprisingly large. And here's part of Edward Borden's wall. He had the entire wall. It was 25 feet long, I believe. Very, very big wall. And just covered it. And there's so much detail in this. Because they're such good photographs, you can blow them up and really have a good look at them. In fact, in the interval, I've got the whole wall you can have a look at with some interpretation on it. And this is the only colour bit we've got of this piece of work. If you've been in the library, we've actually got this in the library. It was produced for an exhibition in here in 2014, and it was left behind. So we've actually got a full-size version of this. Causes quite a stir when you say what it is. So this is the Tempest, and again, there's old Father Neptune there. And for comparison, there's a black and white picture. Now this sketch turned up at the Froy Gallery in 2017, and someone rang me up and said, "Can you write about it?" without showing it to me. This is part of it. And a bit of digging round discovered it had been on view here many, many years ago in a Revilius exhibition. So it's a fairly sizable sketch. The reason I put this up is you can see what the differences are between Borden's sketch and the actual reality, and you can see how much he changed here. So it makes you understand that he was changing things all the time. This is Shakespeare and Ben Jonson, and we've got Britannia up there with her trident, but of course in this one she's a pot plant. But this is the more amusing one, because if you look at the strange jester up there, he's got his hand in a very suggestive place. But by the time we get to the real one, he's dropped his hand and it's a bit more decent. And now we go on to the hall painting. This is a completely different thing. This was not painted onto a wall. This was done on panels of canvas, 3 panels of canvas. Charles Mahoney is the least known of these 3 artists. His actual name was Cyril. He got this nickname at the Royal College. And he was told to paint something that was fairly sober, so as not to distract from the performances that were going on in the stage. So here we have in the middle, these are Morley students folk dancing, and they're picking apples and having a nice time, picnics. These were all modelled on Morley students. And you'll see that these figures in between are very much dressed in late 1920s dress, whereas the front row, they're much more classical. Now this is a very bad picture we found at Lambeth Archives, and it is an orchestra playing on the stage. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it any better, but it gives you a nice idea how high up it was. And we don't know what the orchestra is. It might be Michael Tippett's orchestra for unemployed cinema musicians. Morley's always been a bit unusual. Yeah, Michael Tippett, his first introduction to Morley was conducting this orchestra. So it might be them, because it's quite a sizable orchestra. And here's a detail of music. So she's in the front row. Kate's going to show you another one in a bit. The college has purchased 4 of the original working sketches, and this is one of them, and they're outside the Holst room. Our folk dance tutor, Hazel James, saw this and said, "That's absolutely perfect." And I said, "Well, he drew it from life." She said, "The way they're holding hands is that the way it should be done." But again, you'll see they're in sort of 1920s, 1930s dress. In a way, it doesn't fit with the rest of the classical theme. Right, so that's a bit about those. Now, John Anthony Greene was one of Edward Borden's pupils. Now, these really are a bit of a mystery because they were only there for 2 years. 2 years. And these were done for love. He wanted to do some painting around the college to link in with the nice ones in the refectory. And he produced these. It's just a sort of Victorian twiddliness, I suppose. And he signed them rather nicely. We had a lot of trouble finding out about John Anthony Greene. In fact, I tracked his family down in the end, and they told me a lot more. So these were done in 1938, and they were actually opened by the Duke of Kent, the one that was sadly killed in the war, in 1939. So you'll see we're edging towards a bit of a disaster here. The Duke of Kent was the last person to sign the college visitors book before it disappeared. And it didn't reappear for 13 years. This was the muddle the college was in after the war. So you can see these are very charming. And Kate's going to tell you a lot more about John Anthony Greene. Now, unfortunately, this is what happened next. Most of you know the college was bombed. We picked this picture because you've got the curve of the hall there. This was actually the Prince of Wales Hall, and the whole mural's gone. And I think that's, yeah. Oh, yes. This turned up as well in a random folder. It's from William Rothenstein. He was the man that actually initiated the project. His writing is pretty terrible. I think Eva Hubbard had asked him to come and do a lecture, and he says, "My days of lecturing are in the past, long forgotten. But I'm glad to know the college gallantly carrying on. I think often with deep regret of the loss of those enchanting paintings, irreplaceable, I fear." I think that's really poignant, that he kept in contact with the college for many years, actually, and did remember those paintings. Right, Over to you.
Thank you, Elaine. So here he is, William Rothenstein. And I'm sort of starting, Elaine knows everything. Elaine knows everything about this, so if we've got any questions, probably Elaine will be able to do it. But what really interested me as a tutor at Morley were all these people I didn't know what they looked like, names. So I've sort of concentrated on finding out what they look like and also finding out what happened to some of the people who have made the murals. So we've seen William Rothenstein. Perhaps we ought to... He was head of the Royal College and a really great artist. You can see from this self-portrait. He was a really good artist in his own right. And here's Eva Hubbock, really great woman, a suffragette. Her husband was killed in the First World War, and then she seems to have really taken off and led the way. And here we have Devine, who donated so much money to the arts. He was an art dealer, and he made his money selling the artwork of impoverished landowners to Americans. That's how he made his money, apparently. Yeah. So, as an artist, it's really quite important to know who has given the money for these things. It's really important as an artist to have sponsorship, you know, and to be supported. The people who do are maybe few and far between. Paul Nash was teaching at the Royal College, and he taught all three of the students who got the commissions. So they were given to young pupils, and we might think about the ideas behind this, the ideas that they had, these people who'd been through the First World War. So Paul Nash is very famous for this painting, We Are Making a New World, made in 1918. So these people have come out of the war and they want to make the world better. This is what they said they wanted the paintings to do, to beautify and cheer up the college and to give a much needed opening to young artists and encourage the revival of the art of wall painting. So this is why they were doing it. They had quite a few reasons for doing it. We had that miserable room, but we also had the fact that the colleges wanted to give opportunities for people after the war who maybe were in need of chances, because artists didn't have a very good time during the First World War. We think about the type of thing that's being produced now. Stanley Spencer, an older artist, same age as the people commissioning paintings at Mural, is making Sandon Memorial Chapel in 1927. So we have wall paintings that are made in memory of people who died in the war. We also have what Elaine referred to, Rex Whistler. He was the first person to be commissioned by Devine, paid to paint the Tate Britain restaurant. And that's a different type of painting. It's made to cheer people up. Yeah? So we have the memorial painting and we have the cheering up decorative painting after the war. So Charles Mahoney and Eric Revilius and Edward Borden, all students, they're the same age, they're 26, they've just come out of college, they need a start. They're those young artists who need a start. And why would they want to do a mural painting? Why would any artist want to do a mural painting? Well, it's fantastic. You're aspiring to be someone from the Renaissance. You're painting on a wall, you're painting a space. And Giotto in the Arena Chapel, have anyone been to see that in the room? Have you seen it? It's wonderful, isn't it? Yes, it's wonderful. And the idea of painting something for a space rather than painting something which is a picture which you then put on a wall. The idea of painting a whole space, putting something that lives in a space, is a very exciting thing, I think, for a painter. At the time, we also have a political situation where, say, Diego Rivera is painting murals in Mexico, the idea of art for the people. We have socialist ideals being painted on the walls. This comes and goes. Here is his painting for San Francisco Art Institute, which is in 1930. I don't think that the murals in Morley were conceived as a political statement, though. I think they were if we conceived more in the idea that we are giving something to the people that will do them good. So I put up John Everett Millet, the idea of the pre-Raphaelites and sort of teaching through painting. Charles Mahoney is much more in this tradition, I think. Although they're all the same age, I think Charles Mahoney is looking back at that tradition. Isn't this a beautiful painting, Adam and Eve, done in 1936? It doesn't seem from the black and white photos that we have what a good colourist Mahoney is. They're really beautiful, and here he is. He has a lifelong love of flowers, and here he is in the greenhouse. This is a self-portrait, apparently. So we have, you know, this fairly heavy figures. They come across as being quite heavy, and they don't get as much liking, as much love as the Borden and Revilius. You said they had to be more sober, and they are more sober. Here's the study for it, though, and we get a little bit more a sense that it's a little bit more lively, perhaps, than it looks in the photos. I thought I'd just show you a later work that he did. He was commissioned. He was a very successful artist. He worked, he taught, as did Borden and Revilius, at the Royal College, and he taught mural painting. And this is his, probably his pièce de résistance, Lady Chapel in Campion Hall, Cambridge, which he painted for quite a long time. Yeah. In fact, he was still painting it, I think he died in 1968. I think he was still doing bits of it there because they had arguments over how much it was costing. But I haven't been to see it. I'd like to go and see it, actually. It's beautiful, isn't it? Yeah. Borden and Revilius put in to paint the refectory together. They were friends. Actually, they were all friends. Mahoney was friends as well. But they were particular friends, and I've always loved this little etching of them in the garden. They were more commercial artists. They didn't train to be mural painters like Mahoney. You can see that their styles are quite similar at that time, both painting watercolours and both doing pieces of commercial work. So this is for a pottery over there. So this is Revilius, and over the other side is Borden. So if we look at this picture, you can see that the space is organised in a fairly similar way, isn't it? Yeah. So we just have these buildings, and the space opens up behind it. And quite a few people at the time, quite a few commentators, said how much they liked that. So you could sit in the refectory, and you had the space behind, and then you had the space coming forward. So you it made the space bigger, which of course is hopefully an idea that by painting an illusionistic painting on the wall, you make the space bigger for yourself. And also you have a nice time just cozying up to them while you're drinking your cup of tea. I thought I'd go on to these. I thought they're really quite similar in feel, really. John Anthony Greene didn't get paid any money for this. And you can't help thinking part of the reason for that might have been that there wasn't any available, and he decided to do it anyway because it was a really good opportunity. He was 26 when he painted this. He was Borden's pupil. And so he's the same age as Borden when he painted the original ones. Davina dies at about the time he's doing these, so there's no money. And here he is. He was a successful artist all his life, so that working with young artists and giving them a chance worked for him. Here he is painting a really bad photo of him. We can't really see what he looks like. In Burley School in Cheshunt, apparently the murals no longer exist, but there's a film of him somewhere painting these murals. He was on the news. And he was with us till 1988. He made his living mainly doing illustration work, and he also worked at the Architectural Association, teaching, and this is one of his railway carriage prints. Yeah? So it's nice to know that he didn't just disappear, that these people, all the people in this talk, have had a career through being given the opportunity to do these murals at Morley. And there's one of his illustrations, and I really feel I've had a book when I was a child that looked like that, don't you? Maybe he did the illustrations.
Oh, right,
yes.
Second half. So there we have Morley in ruins, and this was a pretty tragic incident. 57 people died in this building. Only one of them was a member of staff, in fact. There's a little plaque behind you, there's a little window behind you, and we've remembered him there. And he was the assistant schoolkeeper, together with his wife and 2 children, which was equally tragic. These people that were sheltering here were actually locals, they weren't students. The college had been designated as a rest centre. So this happened one night, the principal had just left the building, crash, one bomb hit the middle of the college. Everything gone, basically. There's a few things survived. All the Morley magazines survived, thank goodness, so we know what was going on. But this big mystery, which I fell over, literally at Reba, went to look at some pictures, and they gave me 3 pictures, and I went, don't know what these are. And they said, oh, go and look it up in the Architect's Journal. And this is what I found. So this is 1950, and it said we had murals in 1950. We had no idea. So it's quite a big art, it goes across 2 pages. So this was an absolute revelation. It's taken me about 2 years to sort this one out. But this is Times Educational Supplement, who did a whole feature on it. It was in our press cuttings book. So the story here is the college was in a mess after the war. All we had left was the library, the Holst room, and the 8 classrooms adjoining. So it was pretty difficult. They were having classes down at the Elephant, here, there and everywhere. And the idea was to cheer up this building. So we've gone back to this cheering up the building, but it really did need cheering up. The extension was actually only 3 years old when the rest of the college was bombed, so it was actually quite new, but it had been damaged as well.
Sorry, can you just say what the extension?
Oh, the extension is the library, the Holst room, and the B classrooms, so that bit. And that was built in 1937. That's the only bit that didn't get bombed.
This building wasn't part of the college?
No, this was still a pub. Yeah. So I'm sure our assistant schoolkeeper, who sadly died in the bombing, was probably a regular here. And probably a lot of the students too, if they weren't in the refreshment room. So there we have this. And this was started by Angela Latham. Now, Kate's got a lot to say about Angela Latham, which I didn't know, so it's been quite interesting. So the idea was they would paint the corridors, and they did. And for all we know, they're still there under the paint. We don't know when they were painted over. We've no real idea about it, but they were protected. They were sprayed with something called Pressifix. So they might well still be there in good condition. Now, the biggest one here was 25 feet long, and this was 2 artists, Fred Millet and Brian Probyn. Fred Millet went on to a very successful career in art. Brian Probyn went in a completely different direction, but you're going to talk about that. So this was based on bits of London, Islington, local. But I was put in touch with Fred Millet's widow about 10 years ago, and she let me have all these pictures. So that's what it actually looked like. So it was beautiful. We haven't got the other ones in colour, but this is absolutely wonderful, I think. And these are some of his original sketches for this mural. And, you know, who knows, it's still there.
Which corridor?
Ah, that took a while to work out as well. There were only 2 floors in that building originally.
So this is the
Yeah, the music floor and the next floor up. There is another floor now on top. That was put on in the 50s. So there were only those 2 floors. So we had a choice basically. It was either the first floor or the ground floor. And it's the first floor because Judy Millet came and visited. She said, yes, it was definitely this floor. And Dennis Richard mentioned it in his memoirs, that it was just past the library. So we pinned it down. If we did ever uncover them, there are a few stray doors in the way now. So they're probably not very intact. This is another one of the scenes. And this was the South London Advertiser. So, unfortunately, what happened to this wonderful mural painting course was it only ran for a year. And why was that? Ran out of walls. Literally ran out of walls. And apparently it was a nuisance. The students were getting in everybody's way because they were cluttering the place up, painting the corridors. So really this is a one-off course. and didn't reappear. And we're going to talk about Angela Latham.
Yeah. Well, I thought there aren't many women in this talk, so I was really interested in who Angela Latham was. She taught at Morley for a few years in the 40s, and when I looked up online, I found that she was a successful artist, exhibited in all the London art societies you now see at the Mall Galleries, exhibited regularly at the Royal Academy in the summer show, worked as a portrait painter. We'll show those. And the thing that I found about her was her house went up for sale a few years ago. This is her house. If you've got 11 million, that's how much it cost to buy. She was married to the head of MI5. So that's quite interesting as well, even though I don't know much about him either. But look, she's painted the whole of her house with murals, and that's how it was sold. Highgate. Yeah. So I just got these off Rightmove, you know. They were in the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail did a thing about it. Just quite interesting, isn't it? There she is. And here are a couple of her portraits. She seems to have done quite a lot of portraits of people in the Royal Academy of Music. She must have had a connection there. And they're still there today. And this is one of them, William Alwyn, writing music while he's cold. That's why he's holding his hands. He's in the cold. Yeah. I couldn't find anything that told me what she looked like. But here she is broadcasting. She gives a talk on Sunday, 6th of February in 1955, about how she taught herself to paint mural paintings. Yeah? And apparently she decided she was going to do this, and with the help of one of her it wasn't her family, she actually, I've completely forgotten who it was who helped her, but she went into her parents' coach house and painted on the walls there. I think she was helped by the gardener or someone like that to mix up the plaster, and she painted directly on the walls. And she was she was really a big part of the London Mural Society as well. So there are a lot of people who teach and spend their whole lives making art and teaching and passing on skills, and we don't necessarily remember who they are. You know, it's just. Here's what happened to Fred Millet. I'm sure I know this poster. He worked as a graphic designer. Look, here he is, London After Dark. Do you remember that poster in the 60s? I'm sure I know it. Yeah. And he also, like John Anthony Greene, he painted murals in schools. So this is a mural that he made for St Crispin's School in the 1950s. So he has summer and autumn, and they've recently been uncovered. So they did what we could do and uncovered the paint and found them, and restored them. And this is what happened to Brian Probyn. He became a cameraman and worked on lots of films. So I just copied the whole lot. I'm not going to tell you exactly, but he was a very successful cinematographer, and here is his biography. Okay.
Right.
Last section.
Right. I'm just going to read you an extract from a letter that Eva Hubbock wrote to Eric Revilius after the war, after the bombing. She says, the loss of your paintings is one part of a big tragedy, and I should like you to know how many people have expressed regret that they have gone. When they were painted, we hoped, of course, that they would remain to delight many generations. We hope that when the new Morley arises after the war, we shall be able to have some sample of your work in memory of all you did for us. And sadly, we didn't, because Revilius was killed working as a war artist. So there was recompense for the bombing. The college got 3 times the amount it originally cost back to get new murals, so £3,900. Dennis Richards was the principal at the time and had this difficult job of A, getting the college rebuilt, and B, getting it decorated. He asked Edward Borden if he'd like to come back and paint the new refectory, which he did. And then the other murals are another story altogether, but we'll start with these first. So these are the ones you can still see, which is great. This is a section from The Knight's Tale. This was the first one of the 3 Borden panels to be done in the refectory. He charged a very small amount for doing these. I think it was something like £500. It really was a very small amount. And I like this one the best because it's got so much life in it. I once challenged on a previous talk people to estimate how many animals there were in the refectory murals. Completely wild, the guesses. It was well over 100. But I really like this one. I think Borden's very good at doing these, you know, repetitive figures. And this sort of decorating of horses is brilliant. So he chose Canterbury Tales. There are 24 Canterbury Tales, and he chose 12 of them. And here's a section from the Squire's Tale. I rather like the little ladies tipping their heads. There's a lot of food in the refectory murals, as you might expect. This is the daftest tale of the 12. If you've ever read any Chaucer, this is just a load of rubbish, this story. Even the narrator said, "Oh, please stop." And this is Silly Sir Topaz. He goes rushing round the country looking for an elf queen and meets the 3-headed monster. It's all up there in the refectory. Here's another nice section with repeated figures. Again, I like this. This is the Clerk's Tale. And here we have Mr. Borden and Mrs. Borden meeting the Queen Mother, who apparently had a wonderful time here when she came to open the building. She said she departed uplifted. Very little press coverage of this. This one only dug up quite recently from the artist, but it's quite nice because it actually mentions the decoration of the Newburn as yet incomplete. They didn't all arrive at once. They arrived a year or two apart. They weren't actually opened until, officially opened until 1963. But I like that. It combines the traditional approach to wall decoration with a modern and very personal understanding of design. This one always confused me because I thought, why did it not look like the other 3? And of course, it's by a completely different artist, Justin Todd. He was another of Borden's pupils, so this is great sort of carrying on of tradition. Borden gave him all the rude stories to do, which I think is quite nice. I'm going to write a bit about this. Actually, I'm going to go back to Mr. Borden for a minute and have a look at those. There's a 4th person in this equation, Douglas Percy Bliss. He was also at the Royal College with the other 3. And they stayed great friends. He was also the art critic for the Scotsman. He actually wrote a book about Edward Borden, which we have in the library. It's a very good book. It was written in 1979. Do come and have a look. And he describes Borden's new characters as flat and heraldic, somewhat like playing card figures. They're no longer droll and lyrical. They are grotesque and comical, and even fierce with their round eyes staring at us. There's never a dull moment when Borden has been at work, which I think is brilliant. And he'd chosen the more decent stories, but he gave the rude ones to Justin Todd. So we'll go back to Justin Todd. The only thing Borden told him to do was keep this wall. If you go to the refectory, there's like a picket fence at the bottom of all the murals. But Justin had just got married, and he and his wife Barbara actually stayed in Brick House with the Bordens, and they arrived carrying their suitcases and a parrot, as you do. They had a very nice summer there sketching out the murals because they were done on boards, and eventually they came back. Justin said this took him 2.5 years to finish, and he has never painted a mural since. I've met Justin a few times. He's quite good fun. And all he said was just keep the wall. But he set this at 45 degrees, which makes it feel entirely different as a picture. What he did tell me is he painted himself into it. And I had an idea he'd done that. He's actually the chap in blue at the top of that table. And that's his wife sitting next to him. Not many people know that. I must get it written down before I leave. And then the next story is quite intriguing. There was still money available for the hall. Now the new hall's not as big as the previous one, and they had a competition for it, which was quite interesting. And the minutes for this, which Jeremy has, and has been reading them intently for about 6 months, I think, tells you the story about how they commissioned these murals. They had a competition, and the people that actually judged it were the heads of the Royal College of Art, Sir Robin Darwin, the Slade, Sir William Coldstream, and the Courtauld Institute, Sir Anthony Blunt. So a subcommittee was formed, there was lots of chat, and an amazing number of artists were approached to do this. Everyone who was anybody in the mid-20th century, John Craxton, Martin Froy, Gerald Marks, Cyril Mahoney, Charles Mahoney, Robert Medley, Kenneth Rowntree, Philip Sutton, Julian Trevelyan. Most of those had a connection with Morley. It may have been slight, but they had a connection. In the end, they went for this one by Martin Froy. And it's quite hard to photograph these murals because they are enormous. This is a contemporary photograph. They don't look great in black and white, but actually you can get an idea of what's going on. He described it as titanic figures, and if you stare at them long enough, you do begin to see that. I have met Martin Froy, he's dead unfortunately now, and he said he did it to the accompaniment of movement to music that was going on in the hall at the same time. These were painted in situ. They're on boards, so they can be taken down. They're currently being covered up. And there we go, that's the Emma contour. That gives you a much better idea of the colour. One side is darker than the other. They're sun up and sun down. But it's quite interesting to talk to him because he hadn't seen them for years and years and years. And he was very pleased that we hadn't ruined them. Right, take over. Ooh.
Yeah. So you were just talking about these people, so I'll whiz through them. So Dennis Richards, here he is, the principal, and they really are hoping that Morley will regain this fame for being somewhere that values art and values murals in particular. And here are the people on the committee. Coldstream, who is such an influential artist working at the Slade, has influenced generations of painters who still paint like him in some ways. A real emphasis on measurement and proportion, sort of grid-like. Ewan Uglow would be someone who comes out of that school. We have Robin Darwin at the Royal College, a really distinguished painter in his own right, but he seems to have concentrated more on building up the technological side, the design side of the Royal College at that time. And we have Anthony Blunt, who was at that time head of the Courtauld. The person who seems to have been most influential actually on the decision to bring in Martin Froy would have been Coldstream, because he was a student at the Slade. So the commission went to a Slade student this time rather than a Royal College student. These are the minutes. Did you want to say something about it? I enlarged them so you could.
They're brilliant, yeah.
Oh,
I just love reading minute books. I'm just really nosy.
Yeah, and that's how we know that Anthony Blunt was part of it, which was, we're hoping for something a little bit more, weren't we?
Meatier.
Something a bit more meaty.
Yeah.
I always thought he was a spy written in the minutes, but they didn't have anything. Yeah. So this is, I just thought we'd think about the Festival of Britain quickly. So the context is that the Festival of Britain has just happened in 1951, and both Charles Mahoney and Edward Borden show work at that festival. Yeah. Actually, it's worth saying that Edward Borden's was destroyed afterwards, isn't it?
Due to bureaucratic incompetence.
Interestingly enough, I think that the little that I've read about the Festival of Britain, it was seen as a political act. So a lot of these murals and works of art were allowed to decay with the change of government. So we have a Labour government and then we have a Conservative government, and they weren't distributed to schools, as was the idea. But anyway. Charles Mahoney actually went for the commission to paint the hall, and this is his design, thanks to the Froy the list gallery, yeah? And it looks rather fun, doesn't it? You can see the whole thing at the top, and then detail. But he didn't get the commission. It's worth just saying we do have a John Piper here. We're not talking about the John Piper because it's not strictly a mural, is it? That's what we decided. It was going to get very, very long. But he also was showing, he was commissioned at this time to paint a mural for Morley, and of course he also showed at the Festival of Britain. You'll have seen by the slides that Elaine has already shown of the refectory, and of course you will know the refectory, that the Borden murals that we have are very different from the Revilius and Borden murals before the war, aren't they? They are slightly heavier. And I think it has to be said that that must be because he was older, and he'd also been through the war himself. So I've repeated John Piper's painting, and this is one of his sketches as a war artist, one of his watercolours, guns firing on the Temne, and done in 1940. So he's a different person from the 26-year-old who's just out of college. His style has also changed. Before the war, or as a younger man, he did a lot of etchings, and I have to say, I got this. My husband, Edward Borden, was my husband's father's godfather, so we're very lucky to have this etching ourselves, and it's absolutely charming. Always loved Edward Borden, and I'd love to have this as well. This is a later one. He starts making lino cuts, so they're much more to do with shape than about line. And I think he loses that sort of 1930s feel, because there's a 1930s style, isn't there? And he begins to go into the 1960s. I think he's just growing older, and he becomes part of, he's working as part of the art scene that's there. This is the most fabulous print, actually, really big. Oh, I've gone the wrong way. And also, he's thinking about his commission to do the Canterbury Tales, isn't he? So he's looking, quite obviously, at medieval art, and so the figures have a different feel. I just thought I'd say which bits are my favourite when I'm in the... I really like the picket fence. When I go and have my cups of tea, that's where I go, and I have a look at how he's painted this picket fence. It's absolutely fabulous. I mean, quite often, I think Borden felt quite conscious that he didn't always paint. He was an illustrator as well. And I've heard he felt worried about working in oil paint after so long. But actually, just the positive and negative shape, if you're a painter, and if you can see the different colours that he uses for these lines and just the way he's mixed up the greys, it gives me great pleasure. I'll just go in there and just have a little look. Yeah. Justin Todd. Well, what happened to Justin Todd? Well, he was an extraordinarily successful artist. He was the young artist brought in at the age of 26. It's the age to come and do these things. Has had a long, long career as an illustrator, and has also taught at Brighton. Yeah, I think at other places as well. Just book after book after book, and it's said that he works very slowly. You say it took him 2 years to do the painting, but actually these illustrations took him a long time as well. And there's rather a nice article online, which I took some of these images from, which describes his working method, which was from left to right and looking very closely. And apparently he's ruined his eyesight, the way that he works. But what a wonderful career. Okay, we come on to Martin Froy. It's always struck me that it's a real change, Morley deciding to go for Martin Froy. They've obviously decided not to go for Mahoney, because they could have done, couldn't they? And why have they done that? Well, I think it's the time again. This is 1959. 1956 and in 1958, the Tate Gallery holds shows of American painting. This is after the Second World War. We're looking towards America. America is deliberately adopting abstract art as their official style, in contrast with the Soviet Union, which has socialist realism. So it is the age of abstraction. We've had abstraction since the turn of the century, but now it comes into its own. And I know from the people who taught me, Vanessa Jackson, Clyde Hopkins, that there was no other style in art schools. You were an abstract, you were taught abstraction. It was the thing to be doing. We've got a lot of artists in here. I've just, Guston, Gorky, Klein, Kooning, Motherwell, Pollock, Rothko. And here are just two of the paintings. Yeah. So I put in the de Kooning rather than a Pollock because we've got the idea of abstraction, but we've also got people who are abstracting from figures, which is what Froy is doing. If we look at what happens to Mark Rothko between 1936 and 1950, you can see he started with figure and he ends up painting with colour and shape. If we look at Froy, he's painting in the life room, obviously. We can see in 1953 we've got a seated nude, still quite obviously a seated nude. And then by 1957 it's a nudes composition, very like, must have been about the same time as he's thinking about our murals. So you can see that there's a real progression there, isn't there? Martin Froy was someone that I didn't know of at all. In fact, I realise I may well have been interviewed for him when I unsuccessfully tried to get onto the MA course at Reading. He was head of art at the same time. But I just put this up. He's someone who taught, was involved in committees, was really quite an influential person, and had a lot of exhibitions. So maybe he'll come into his own again. Yeah. He unfortunately is no longer with us. Mm. Yeah. Okay.
Right, this is the last bit.
We're overrunning.
So anyone who knows Morley will know this one. It's one of my favourites. I insisted on being photographed in front of it a few years ago. Now this one really is, I describe it as homegrown because it was done by the students. And here's a view I took recently. This shows up all the white paint splashes on it, which is a bit embarrassing because it is really very fine. And this was actually a weekend project, it says at the bottom. There is a little plaque there which says this was painted in one weekend. I managed to contact Patrick Goff, who designed it, and he said it took 6 weeks. So I think that's a bit misleading. So this actually goes, it's like an atrium basically. It goes through 3 floors at the end of the extension. And it's called the Tree of Life because someone christened it that. It didn't start off with that name. It's actually lupins. It's probably quite hard to imagine, but can you see it? It's lupins. And it gets darker as it goes down. It's about decay. This was actually sponsored by Niace, and they paid for the materials. The whole wall had to be painted 3 times before they could even start on it. Because we're talking 1937 plasterwork here, needed some work. It was scaffolded all the way up, and I think that was also paid for. And 60 people took part in this project, with the students on the New Art Foundation course doing the bulk of it. The youngest person was the 8-year-old son of Vice Principal Philip O'Halloran, and the oldest is one of the governing body who was in his 70s. So it's a truly inclusive project, this one. And it was started at the top and it was worked down to the bottom. And Patrick says, this painting of a lupin represents a tree of life, new petals at the top, full flower in the middle, gently going into decay at the bottom. And the whole is reinforced by the colour. The grid is the rule that governs enlarging an image in traditional painters' techniques, but also the structures that govern life, rules and regulations. And Patrick's still very active as an artist. I've met a few times since then. This is what happened from the top. So I took this from the top landing. And Kate's going to talk about Patrick Goff.
Yeah, so you can find him online, which is good. And he's still with us. And there he is, looking out at us. He doesn't put the dates on any of his artwork that's there. But I found this, geraniums and flower paintings. It's obviously interested. And I thought, doesn't that look like our mural the other way up? And you can imagine him giving the students a squared up copy of the design and asking them to paint certain sections of it. I think these are more recent. This is one of his more recent paintings, and it seems to me that he's got quite textural in what he's doing. He's quite an interesting man because he's taught and he's painted and he's also worked, he's also been a photographer, and you were saying he's also
designed hotels.
Designed hotels, so he's had quite a portfolio, you know, he's done a lot of different things. So it was a success, wasn't it? But the fact that he brought his students into it is something that actually Morley does more often than you might think. I thought of a project that happened during my time at Morley, which was a connection between H.B. Revis and Morley College. It's still there, a little bit faded, at Waterloo. I don't know if you've walked past it. The advanced painting students designed images for the columns, and with the support of Steve Wright, their tutor, these were photographed and placed on the columns because they needed to be washable in case they were graffitied. So we have modern technology there coming in. And actually, can you see there's one with Elaine on it, because it's actually more than just the paintings.
I have been graffitied on as well.
Have you? They haven't washed you down. No. But rather a lovely thing to do. And I thought we ought to celebrate Steve Wright, who's one of our tutors, who put the thing together. Here he is. He's in the summer exhibition this year. So go and buy his painting. And here he is working on his painting in his studio. And in 2023, I found we've had our students from Kensington and Chelsea. I think this was the Art Foundation students again, asked to design a poster, a T-shirt, as well as paint a 13-metre long mural in Bard Road, and here they are doing that. So the idea of giving our students the opportunity, this is a really important part of their education. Here's another mural this year, 24-25, mural designed for Lordship Lane Primary School in North London. And I understand they're doing another one after that, is that right? Yeah. So here are the children who, I take it they had the children helping as well. Yeah.
The children, those are the school's values. And then this year they're doing a completely new mural as well, which they've finished, which will be on show next month.
And is it on the same wall?
No, it's another building they're doing.
Oh, great. Isn't it good? Yeah. So finally, should a lot of murals get destroyed, Martin Froy's is being preserved. It's being cleaned and is going to look much better than it has done. It's got a bit dirty. But a lot of murals, they disintegrate. And it's probably true to say that if we still had the Borden and Revilius murals in the basement, they would have deteriorated just like the Rex Whistler has in the Tate. They painted them with oil on the wall, with wax rubbed over the top to protect them. And what has happened in the Tate restaurant is that, or the room that was the Tate restaurant, was that the wall has begun to disintegrate behind the paint, and so they had to do a lot of preservation. There's also been the problem that things date, and some of the subject matter in this mural has caused a great deal of offence to people looking at it now. So in fact, it's no longer a restaurant, and there's been a film made to accompany it, looking at the subject matter, which is is about slavery, basically. Attitudes change, and things can go out of date. Should we keep them, or what do we do? What do we do with these wall paintings? Think about it, the Leek Street murals. Leek Street, near here, is a place where things come and go. They're painted and overpainted, and there's a huge amount of energy in that. Things hardly last 5 minutes. Should we be doing that? Should we be painting over them? The fact that with Angela Latham they ran out of space in a year, should they have just painted over the top of them and had a place in the college where people could paint murals? I was really shocked to find that David Tremlett's drawing for Through Thinking has been replaced on the North Staircase in the Tate. Yeah? We've got Chrysophylle instead. And I feel that that's really quite a brave decision to make something, and this is a political mural because it commemorates Khadija Saye and Grenfell. So I think if we run out of walls, maybe we ought to make space for people, and maybe we shouldn't be afraid of moving on. But I'm really glad to see that we still have evidence, we still do this at Morley, that we are there trying to cheer up people, cheer up their environments, encourage wall painting, because I think it still does have a place, and to give a much needed opening to our young artists. Okay.